That's great, and it's very interesting theme. And I see everyone is so excited. I see some replies in the chat, so I think we can start. Well, do you have a presentation for us, or maybe?
I do, and I will try to share that right now. Can you see the presentation?
Yep.
Fantastic. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about trees today, and especially about how science can help us to communicate with nature in general. Before I start, I just wanted to thank some of the people that I've been working with, because like all of science is really teamwork. I've been working with a team of people, and these are really important people to me. Clarice Hart and Taylor Jones in particular, they work at Boston University and at Harvard Forest, and they've been really helpful with this project. And with that said, let's dive straight in. Let's talk about trees. I'm sure you all know trees. Trees are everywhere. This is kind of a map of the world where forests are represented as mountains, as if they were mountains. And you can see that from where I live in Canada now to Ukraine to like the tropics, trees are everywhere. And they are really a dominant form of life. And they're not just everywhere, they can also be really big. So trees are some of the smallest organisms we know on Earth. On the left here, you can see me with a couple of colleagues working in California, where we studied some of the biggest trees in the world. These are called redwood trees, and they can be up to 100 meters tall. So we actually climbed up some of these trees. So in the middle picture, you see Lizzie, one of my colleagues, who's climbing up that tree because we were trying to understand how these trees work. Because when you have such a big tree, one of the big questions for us as scientists is, how can that thing even work? The leaves at the very top, for example, they need water. And how does the tree, against gravity, transport water all the way up 100 meters? So we climbed up into these trees to try to understand how this works. On the picture of the right, I dare you to try to find me in the picture. It's a picture I took while climbing up the tree. And if you look very carefully, you can see that there's actually a small little creature, and that's me, sitting on a branch. And you can only see the shadow. And that just gives you an idea of how big these trees are. When you climb up these trees, it can take a lot of time just to climb up there. And they really provide these towering, great structures in some places where they almost build like cathedrals. It almost feels like natural places, like almost like a church, but a natural one that grew by itself. And they are not only tall, but they're also really old. And sometimes they are really large without being tall. You know probably that most trees can be 100 years or 200 years old, but trees can be much older than that. There are now some trees that we know of that are thousands of years old. A colleague of mine recently dated a tree and determined the age of a tree in Chile, and he thinks it's several thousand years old. The trees I'm showing you here is actually an aspen tree in Utah. And what you might think is loads of small trees is actually one big tree. It's one clone. It's all the same tree. And that tree, that's why, for example, the leaves change color in exactly the same color at exactly the same time. And they're all connected through their roots. They are all part of the same organism. And this organism is called Pado. And it's a large quaking aspen that covers 34 hectares. That's a lot of surface area in Utah in the US. And some people think that this tree might be really, really old, like probably tens of thousands of years. So overall, trees are really important. Wherever we go, we generally see trees. We plant them in our cities because they're also really important for us. They give us shade. They help us sequester carbon from the atmosphere to reduce the effects of climate change, and they dominate landscapes. And they are really important building materials and fuel sources to heat with firewood, for example. And trees...
We have a question, maybe. I'm sorry, Tim. Maybe.
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead.
Do you have a question or you want to comment on something? Hi.
Hello, I'm Ivan. Unfortunately, trees are not everywhere because humans are chopping down many trees, and they're building some maybe sanctuaries, buildings for people to live, offices,
Roads. Yeah.
roads, and the trees there are less and less trees all the time. But also people are planting trees, making parks for trees to grow in.
Yeah, you're right.
That's a really good observation, Ivan. And actually, it's really important because trees are so important and they cannot run away that we protect them in a way. And more important than planting trees is actually protecting those that are already there, because they took a long time to grow and develop. And it's very difficult to replace by just planting a new tree. Planting trees is really important, but we need to really start by protecting them. And you're absolutely right. We need to be careful also. Like, it's all right to cut a tree in a forest and to make things out of it. But we need to be careful not to cut more trees than they can grow back. So to do that in a sustainable way so that the forest stays a forest.
Also, trees can't grow in the desert.
Some trees can, but they still need a little bit of water. They still need a little bit of water. Like this tree you see here, it lives in a desert and it looks dead, but it's not. This is a tree that I actually visited in Arizona and I took this picture, and it's very dry where that tree lives, but every now and then it rains and that's enough water for it to survive. It's a very difficult life for the tree because it's very dry, but it can still survive.
Trees use their roots to suck up the nutrients and the water from the soil, like we are drinking juice with a straw.
Yeah, that's right. And
Okay,
that's why they need water in the soil, so that they can actually, because they drink that. But I will come back to that in a second.
thanks,
Shall we do
Ivan,
another-
for these comments. Yeah, that's
Should we
okay.
Should we do another question, or do you want me to continue for the moment being?
How you saying? Because like maybe you have more time for give us all information. Maybe we don't have time for questions now. Maybe we can do it later.
Let me continue a little bit, and then we do another question, and we continue in that manner. Okay.
Great. Let us know.
Okay. So Ivan made a very good point that some trees are cut down, and that's because they can't run away. Other than animals, they have to survive their entire life where they are. So if they are like this tree in a very dry place, they need to survive that very dry place. But it can be the opposite as well, and can be very wet, and they still need to somehow survive there. So they need to adapt. They need to adapt to their environment, and if their environment changes, they also need to adapt to that change. They need to try to really find a way to live in that place without being able to run away. And they are very good at that. Ivan was right that they are not everywhere, but they can be in a lot of places. They can be in very windy places where sometimes they grow very bizarre because the wind is always pushing them in one direction. They can also be in very hot places, although that's very difficult to survive because it's so hot and they are sweating so much. And they can be in very cold places, like here in Canada. But also that is quite difficult because the snow can sometimes break branches because it's so heavy on the branches. The important thing is, no matter where these trees are, they all survive in that place and record actually the story of that place. And that's a really interesting fact as a scientist for me, and something that I study. So if you've ever cut down a tree in a temperate ecosystem like Ukraine, you can see that there are these rings. This is a slice of a tree that we cut down, and you can see all these tree rings. And pretty much everybody knows that you can count them because one ring is equal to 1 year of the tree's lifetime. So you can know how old the tree is, but you can do much, much more with this, because If it's a big ring, you actually know that that was a very good year for the tree, and that the year that the tree was able to grow a lot. And if it's a very small ring, then maybe there was a year that wasn't very good for the tree. And I'll just give you one example, and then I'm going to take another question. Here's like a story that some of the trees told me while I was studying them. I will show you 3 different pictures from 3 different trees at Harvard Forest. This first one is a picture, and this is just a tree ring, what you see in the image here. What is red is the wood. It's just that I looked at it under microscope, and you can see the individual cells. So you can see the different tree rings here, and what is blue is the bark. And if we start at the bark, the first ring has almost kind of a false ring in it. And that's because in that year, there was a drought, and the drought was so strong that the years that the tree started to grow differently. And that left, it's almost as if the story wrote down that story of that drought. The tree wrote that down in its wood. If we look at a different tree, here's a red maple tree. It's wood from a red maple tree in the same forest. You can see that there's one big ring and one small ring, but the structure of the rings look quite similar. And the small ring is also an effect of the drought. It was so dry that it grew less, but it didn't change how the ring looks. It just made it smaller. And then there was another tree, a red oak tree, and the wood of the red oak tree just grew a lot. We just have one big ring because the oak doesn't need as much water. So it was growing much faster. And with that said, maybe we can take another question.
Okay. Masha, are you ready to ask? Or
Yes. Hello, Tim. I would like to ask, do you like your job, like climbing on trees, do you like it? Or maybe not really?
No, I do like my job. I do like my job a lot. Climbing trees can be a lot of fun, especially if you do it for a purpose, because I'm learning something about the tree and I'm helping people to also manage how we manage forests afterwards. Nowadays, one of the main things we do with trees here in Canada is making maple syrup. And as Ivan said, some people cut down trees, and we want to make sure that we can make maple syrup for the future. And with my work, I can help to contribute to how we manage these forests. And I really like that. And on top of that, I'm allowed to play in the forest every now and then and climb trees, which is really good fun.
Okay. And what is the most important for you in that job?
In the job?
yeah.
What's the most important thing? That's a really, really hard question. I think there are loads of important things, but I couldn't say what's the most important thing. I think for me, one of the important things is that I contribute, that I do something that's useful for other people, but also that I actually enjoy what I'm doing. And I wouldn't say that one is more important than the other, but these 2 things are really important for me. And, you know, with the job I have to be very creative. We have to come up with new things. And I really like that. So I really enjoy what I'm doing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
For a question, Masha. And we can take another one or we go on?
Or you take another one.
Okay, good. Vlad, hi.
Yes, hello. My name is Lars. By the way, I am bird watcher, and maybe it's also the part of topic tree, because a lot of birds live on tree, and I read one article from Frankfurt scientist company. Maybe do you know? And in the article was talking that the old tree is more important for ecosystem than a young tree. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I already said that earlier. You know, for me, it's really important that, first of all, before we even plant new trees, we protect old trees, because they fulfill a different service and a different function. If you have a small tree, quite often it's very straight, it's very nice, it's very smooth, which means that, for example, for wildlife like birds and insects in particular, there are not a lot of small little nooks and crannies and niches where they can live in. So the older a tree gets, the more it lives, the more it, sometimes a branch will break. And then, that provides a little habitat where some other species of wildlife might live. So all trees are really important for biodiversity. And there's something else. So on top of being important for birds and insects are important as well, because without insects, the birds don't have that much to eat. So having these old trees that have a lot of little, like you can think of it as houses, as insect houses, but they only really develop when trees get older, because young trees don't have that much yet, and they don't have that much surface. Their structure is not as complex. On top of that, old trees are also really important for growing and for sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. So with climate change, we have a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, and bigger trees take more carbon out of the atmosphere than smaller trees. So they are really important for that as well. So I personally think that it's true what you read, and that it's really important actually, and that larger trees are disproportionately more important than small ones. And this is one of the reasons why we need to protect large trees.
Yes, because for example, I always compare my garden and garden of my friends. In my garden is a lot of old trees. Yes, in the trees are a lot of hole when live insects, birds, and my friends have a lot of young trees in their gardens, but they don't have such a lot of quantity of birds, insects. So yeah, it really help. It's really helpful. For example, for bird watching when in your garden are all trees. So yeah.
Yeah, there's actually one more interesting point which I might just bring up quickly, and that is some animals are dependent on specific small plants that grow on trees, but they don't grow on young trees because they didn't have time to establish themselves. So for example, here in Canada, there is a reindeer-like creature. It's like reindeers, and they eat lichen, and the lichen only grows on very old trees. So you need old forests for these reindeer to find food in winter. And in summer, they can eat other things, but to survive the winter here, they need this lichen, and they need to have old trees to have that lichen. So they really fulfill a very important role.
Yes,
Thanks.
and for mushrooms also. Yes, for mushrooms, because they also eat. Yes, thank you.
Let's do this short. Yeah, thanks a lot, because we have a lot of hands, and that's really
I
good
understand.
questions. You always prepare good ones. Yeah, so we have time for questions, or let's go.
Let's do a couple of more slides, and then I'm sure we will have much more questions. So
Yeah, true.
I talked to you about how trees are important and how they can even like record their stories sometimes. Now, one of the interesting things I found while talking to lots of people is that trees are not only recording their stories, but we also want to talk to them. There are loads of humans that want to talk to them. And throughout pop culture and throughout ancient mythologies, trees are really important to humans. For example, I don't know if you know Lord of the Rings, but they have talking trees called the Ents. And this is really happens a little bit everywhere. In Grandmother Willow, in Pocahontas, there's Grandmother Willow. In Avatar, there's the Tree of Souls. In Norse mythology, there's Yggdrasil, the Tree of Life. And I'm sure you know this one. In Guardians of the Galaxy, there is Groot. Shouldn't be say Tree of Souls. That should say Groot. Anyway, like these talking trees are like, they exist everywhere because clearly we humans want to talk to trees. We want to understand how they work and how they feel, and we want to talk to them. We feel somehow connected to them. So in my work, what I started to do is we started to measure how the tree actually works. So these are some of the instruments that we installed in the trees when we climbed them. And you can see here that there are like solar panels, and in the middle, this is what we call a dendrometer, and it measures how fast the tree grows. There's a little metal pin in the middle, and that's pushed back by the tree while it grows. And these instruments allow us to measure how quickly the tree grows and how much water goes through the tree. And this data then helps us to create models. So we can create these type of models of the trees, which are digital models, where we can basically try to simulate the tree and see what the structure looks like and how the tree looks like. And we do this with all sorts of methods like laser scans. And when we have these models and we have the measurements of how much the trees grow and how much they move, then we can start using that data to tell a story as well. So what I did at Harvard Forest is I took this tree on the right, it's an oak tree, and I equipped it with all sorts of sensors. And then I used that data to tell the story of that tree. So the way it works is we have all of these sensors on the tree. The data is then transmitted to a computer. The computer processes that data and then writes messages, and the messages are put onto social media. And then you can follow the tree and you can see what the tree says. And it's not really the tree talking, it's more the data talking. But this is what it looks like. So the tree has a Twitter account and you can follow the Twitter account. And when you go onto the Twitter account, you can see messages like this message. In July of 2019, the tree said, yesterday it was very hot. With a daily average of 27 degrees, it was the 24th hottest day I can remember. And the tree can tell you about its experience, about the data it experiences, and about how it grows, how warm it is, how wet it is, and how it affects the tree. And that is made possible through the technology, through measuring things like temperature and growth, and then through translating them into messages that we humans understand. And with that said, I would say, I would like to know what you guys would like to know from a tree. I would like to know what are the questions that you would like to ask. And I think we have plenty of time for questions as well.
Yeah, so Nastya, hello, your hands up.
Yeah, I'm Nastya. I just want to add something you said about how old the trees. I was born in Zaporizhia, and we have got in Iceland, and there was a tree that had more than 7,000 of years, but now it is not now because it is very old.
Yeah, trees can be really old, and interestingly, the older a tree gets, the slower it grows, the older it gets, because quite often trees don't die of old age. They quite rarely, they're not like humans. At some point, we get very old, and then that, we might die of old age. Trees, they can get really, really old. They often die out being big. And if they grow slowly, they only get to being big very slowly. So if a tree grows really slowly every year, then it can become really, really old before it gets so big that it becomes dangerous for the tree. Because quite often the tree dies because, the wind blows it over or the snow breaks a branch. And that's because it's so big. It's not because it's so old. So it's really interesting to see how alien trees are and how old they can get.
Well, this is super interesting facts. Didn't know that. And so, Alexandra, you have your question?
Yes. Hello. I have an answer to your question. What would I like from a tree? I think the most interesting thing that I can ask the tree is what's the most interesting thing that you have been seen of a day, because tree can't move and it's always standing on one place, and it can tell lots of interesting things about place that it is standing on, and maybe of a history of this place, because trees can be thousands of years, and maybe thousands, hundreds years ago, there was an ancient city, or it was a 19th century's people at villages, and it will be a very interesting to hear.
about it. And I wanted to ask you one question. That are all these photos of trees taken by you and your group, or no?
The photos that I showed you today,
Yes.
most of them are taken by me, yeah. There are a few which weren't taken by me, but most of them was me, yeah.
Yeah, because they are very beautiful, and I wanted to ask this.
Thank you.
Thank you for answers.
You're welcome. And I'm also gonna add something thanks for letting me know what you would like to know from a tree. I find that really interesting. And you're absolutely right, because the tree can't run away and it stays there. It could potentially, if we could really talk to it, if it had a memory, we could even learn something about mammoths or, you know, animals that don't exist anymore, because at some point, maybe they came past that tree. That's impossible to reconstruct, unfortunately, with data. So science has limits in what we can ask as questions and what we can answer. But it's interesting to test those limits and find new ways to discover new stories. Should we go with another question?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, there was Polina. Hi.
Hello, I'm Polina, and we all know that paper is made of tree. So I know that from one tree we can get 17 packs of 500 sheets each piece of paper.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, if I go back to show you these cells, this is wood of trees, right, under microscope of different types of trees. And there are what is red in those images is actually a chemical that's called cellulose. And cellulose is what paper is made out of. So basically we take that material from the cell walls and we just, you know, through a chemical procedure, make paper out of it. So you're absolutely right. And that's why I try to reuse paper as much as possible and recycle it, because if we use new paper, then, you know, we need to cut down trees for that. And as I said earlier, that can be done in a sustainable way. We just need to make sure to not cut more trees than the forest regrows, because the forest grows every year.
And I think I want to translate this thing about cellulose so to Ukrainian. Окей, я просто хочу привести це для вас про всяк випадок, що ми знаємо, що папір роблять з целюлози, і оці червоні цяточки на цих картинках, це є елемент целюлоза, з якого роблять папір. Тому викладач вважає, що ресайкл – це дуже важливо, тому що ми можемо це робити з папером. I'm done. Thanks.
Well, thank you for translating. I wish I could do that myself, but I'm not there yet.
Okay, that's why I'm here.
Do we have another question?
Oh yeah, we have a lot of questions. Danilo, I want to ask you a question now.
Hi. I have one question. No, it's two questions. And if we cut down all the tree, we will be able to breathe?
Can you say it again, please, Danilo?
Yeah. If we will be able to breathe if we cut down all the trees.
Oh,
right. You want to understand whether we are able to.
You're talking in the same time. That's okay. Just Danilo, can you say it again and then?
And if we cut down all the trees, we will be to breathe?
Okay, yeah, you're right, Tim. You got it.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question. So you are right that when they do photosynthesis in leaves, all the plants actually, not just trees, but all the plants, they take CO2 from the atmosphere, carbon, and they make oxygen. And oxygen is what we breathe. So we need oxygen to be able to breathe. And like pretty much all animals do. So trees produce that oxygen. However, if we cut down all of the trees, we will still be able to breathe for a little while because there's still some oxygen in the air. So as long as that's not used up, we can still breathe, but it won't be there won't be any new oxygen and we will just use it up. It's like as if you have a bank account and you never put any money in it. And then we keep breathing and breathing and slowly taking out money. Eventually it's empty. So if we cut down all the trees, eventually there won't be, if we kill all the plants, not just the trees, but we would need to kill all the plants because grasses as well produce oxygen, then eventually there wouldn't be any air in the atmosphere. But that's not really that dangerous because plants are really good at growing in all sorts of places, and there will always be some plants that generate oxygen unless we really destroy the entire planet, I think. Plants are really resilient. So I wouldn't be worried about not being able to breathe. It's more worrying that that climate is changing and that trees can help us with that because they can absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. But that's a much bigger concern.
And to my question, and another tree in the Harry Potter is military willow.
Yeah.
The tree from Harry Potter, yeah.
Yeah, as I said, there are trees and quite often they can talk, the weeping willow. There are trees in most fantasies because I think it's because really we know them very well because, I mean, you've all seen a tree, right? You've probably all touched a tree. Pretty much every human, there are very few humans on Earth that have never seen a tree, yet very, very few humans know a tree. They're really alien because they are so different. They are, you know, much older, they're much bigger. They can also be smaller, but they tend to be bigger and they can't run away. And they don't have a brain or heart. They don't have a central organ. They are very different in how they work from us. So it's really difficult to sometimes understand them.
It's lost my question. Thanks.
Thank you, Danilo. Okay, and we can talk to Diana, and maybe if you have something to tell us more, then let's listen. Hey.
Hello, I'm Diana. I wanted to answer the question, what would you like to know from a tree? I would like to know what birds did the tree see today and maybe what insects that live in the tree, because maybe we will know some more animals than insects because of that. And I also have a question for you. What is the most complicated and hard part of the job, your job?
That's a really good question. I'll answer that in a second. I'm gonna say something about your comment first. It's a really cool idea to think about what, you know, who visits the tree, who lives in the tree. And we actually do that already. So the tree at Harvard Forest that is equipped, there's a camera looking at the tree, and the camera has a sensor that every time there is something walking past, it takes a picture. It's a camera trap, we call it. And then we sometimes get pictures of animals like deers, bears, foxes, and they come and visit the tree. And what happens is that picture is then taken by the algorithm and put onto the internet. So sometimes sometimes the tree will say something, hey, look who's just visited me. And, you know, there will be a picture of a bear walking past the tree or something like that. So we can do that for bigger animals with the technology we have. For smaller animals, that's still tricky because, you know, if you have a motion sensor that's so sensitive that every fly triggers it, then you will just have millions of photos. Because there will always be a leaf moving somewhere or something moving in the image and it would be triggered. But that's really, it would be really cool to especially do that with nighttime cameras as well, to see what happens during the nighttime. Because, you know, who sits in a forest for the entire night and just listens to what happens? And we rarely have that luxury. So it would be nice to use that technology to see, you know, who visits, who comes and goes. And then your question about my job, sorry, can you repeat the question? Because now I've been rambling for so long.
Yeah, my question was, what is like the most difficult part of your job?
The most difficult part, I think, is the way science, especially with forest science, works is that, you know, you go to university, you get a bachelor's degree, you get a master's degree, you get a doctorate. I have my doctorate. I'm a doctor. And then you try to get a position as a professor. And the most difficult part of the job is actually getting that position, because there are loads of people who want to do this job, and there are not that many people that can be professors, because it's an expensive position to pay somebody to just, you know, be creative. So it's quite difficult sometimes to find the right job. I've been quite lucky that I found a good job where, you know, I'm paid to basically do this for the rest of my life. And I can, my life is, I'm really lucky that I can just ask questions and try to find creative ways to answer them. But finding that position, I think, was the hardest part, the most difficult part.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for your question. And what we do next? We talk.
Yeah, I have a couple of other images we could look at, but we still have so many questions. Why don't we continue with questions?
Yeah, and guys, we have many questions. So I think I will be asking someone who didn't spoke yet, okay? And I will come back to you when, like, next, okay? If you were talking already. So Boris, hi.
Hello, Tim. What do you think about the fact, I heard the fact that oceans clean the ecosystem better than trees. What do you think about this?
Better, that's the key word there, right? Oceans, so what happens in the oceans is you have algae, and algae are small plants, and they do the same things that trees do. So they help, and in total, at a global planetary scale, oceans and terrestrial ecosystems, so like forests and grasslands on land, they absorb roughly as much pollution, as much carbon pollution, one as the other. So I wouldn't say one is better than the other. They are very different ecosystems, and they are very different ecosystems that provide very different types of diversity. We still need both of them. We definitely need both of them to have a healthy planet, because they provide crucial services. And trees provide loads of other services that oceans cannot provide, and vice versa. Oceans also provide services that trees cannot provide. So it's important to keep both of these ecosystems very healthy, lands like forests on land and oceans as well.
Thank you. And I say the second, in our town, there are many a group of people, and their hobbies is bird watching. They go to the forest and photographies. They take photos of bird, and this is very relaxed hobbies.
Yeah, bird watching is a very, very popular pastime in general. I'm always the weirdo, because everybody goes bird watching and animal watching, and I'm watching the trees, and everybody looks at me like, you're weird. Why do you look at the trees? But I find the trees fascinating. They have so much cool things to tell you, all the different shapes and forms. Sometimes you look at a tree and you wonder, why did you grow that way? Why didn't you grow in another way? And, you know, if you start training it, you can try to learn on how they grow and why they grow and what they do things. And it's really, I find it fascinating. You know, why do some trees have smooth bark and others have really rough bark? All these things, like whenever people go bird watching with me, I just end up watching the trees.
And Boris, do you have you got answers to questions?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, Boris.
Yeah, so we can take some photos or slides and do some slides and go with the questions. How do you think?
Yeah, I just have two more that I wanted to say something a little bit about, and then we can do like continue with the questions. So first of all, what you see here is actually a forest that I'm currently managing. So in that forest, we try to use the forest in a sustainable way. So we cut some wood. We also make maple syrup. And maple syrup is, I don't know whether you've ever tried it, but it's really popular here in Canada, but it's almost like honey. It's really sweet. And you can make it from trees, from a liquid that comes out of trees in the spring.
I wanted to translate for some people. So maple syrup is kленовий сироп. Okay, you get it? So yeah, that's all.
Give me 10 seconds and I'll get some and show them.
Oh, great. I tried it once, I think. And the weird thing, I know that someone adds maple syrup to like a potato. Okay.
Can you see this?
Yeah.
So this is maple syrup. It's like more liquid than honey, but it's really sweet and it has a very nice taste. I personally like it a lot. And to get maple syrup, you have to drill a hole into a tree at the end of winter, and then in spring, very sweet water comes out of the tree, and you can boil that water until it becomes the syrup. And we use it a lot with pancakes, for example, in the morning.
And oh yeah, okay. I was wondering, do you use it for like maybe smashed potatoes?
You could. It's not very common. The most common uses are really pancakes. And then there are all sorts of traditional dishes here that use it. For example, they boil eggs in maple syrup, and then you have like sweet eggs and these kind of things. And a lot of desserts. For a lot of cakes and stuff, they use it as a sweetener.
Cool, cool.
Yeah, so this forest, and you can see this forest is really diverse. There are loads of different types of trees. They all have like, I took this picture with a drone at the end of the summer when the leaves started to change color. So they hadn't changed color much yet, but they started to change color. And you can see that, you know, they all do different things. There are some trees that are more red, some are more yellow, and they have different shapes and forms. And then the last image I wanted to show you is of some scientists, some of my colleagues that actually, because we talk about the oceans and how little we know about the deep ocean. We talk about space and how little we know about, you know, space. And we put a lot of money into exploring the deep ocean and space. But we know very little about what happens in the canopy of trees at the tree level. And it's so close, but it's so far away because it's really difficult to get to the leaves at the top of the tree without destroying the tree. So some of my colleagues actually tried to build this float that they put on top of the canopy in the tropics so that they can then walk on top of the tree and do measurements on the leaves. And they looked at insects and birds and all sorts of things. Because if you're at the bottom of the forest, especially in the tropical rainforest where they were working, you couldn't even see the canopy and you couldn't see how what was going on there and not do any measurements. So the only way to get there was with this type of float. And it's really interesting to me how little we know about that layer of the forest, of what happens in the canopy. Because even when we climb the tree, we can't climb to the very, very top because the branches get so small that they don't support us anymore and they would break. So what happens in that top layer, which is the most important layer for the tree, is really difficult to measure. And we know very, very little about. And one way to do this is with these kind of expeditions. And I hope that one day I will have the chance to do something similar. That would be really cool.
This is really fascinating thing to build this. Yeah. Okay. Do we have time for questions? Yeah, we're doing questions now, right?
I still have at least 10 more minutes to answer questions.
Yeah, of course. So, okay, Sophia, but obviously not Sophia. I think Sophia's son. Hi.
No, Sophia's brother.
Oh, okay. What is your name?
Arsen.
Nice to meet you. What do you want to say?
About what will happen with a human when it will be in як буде
Кажи.
я не знаю.
Скажи українською, я перекладу.
Закрита, повністю закритій кімнаті, яка не має ні дерев, нічого, з якої не можна вийти.
Я зрозуміла тебе. Я
може
зрозуміла
протриматись?
Okay, this is an interesting question, and Arsene wants to know what will happen to human if it will stay in the room without no windows, no doors, and without any plants, and how long the human can survive. I think maybe with the, I don't know, without meal, or I will ask, з їжею чи без їжі?
Without.
Okay, and without food.
I think the main limitation will be food, because the problem is the most important thing is actually water.
Yeah.
You need water, and you need water. You can survive without water for 2 or 3 days, maybe, but that's pushing it. Without food, you can survive quite a bit longer. And then eventually, if you would have food and you could survive longer, but there's the room is really perfectly sealed and there's no air that comes in and no oxygen, then eventually you would suffocate. Eventually you wouldn't be able to breathe because there's no oxygen. So that's why it's important to have aeration systems and air moving through places so that new oxygen can come in, and also some other gases can be pushed out so that you can actually breathe.
But how long can you last?
Okay, so if you have food and water, but you don't have the air conditioning system and air coming
It depends.
in.
Yes.
It depends on the size of the room and how much oxygen there is in the room. If it's a bigger room, you can last much longer, because basically you can find, because every time you breathe,
5 meters в довжину і в висоту.
5 meters, yeah, like a square room.
Yeah. I would have to calculate that.
Yeah,
I can't tell you off the top of my head, because I would have to calculate the volume of air. My lung volume is about a few liters. So every time I breathe, and I can rebreathe the same air twice, because not all the oxygen is taken in and out every time. So if we make it easy and we say, I have 5 liters of lung volume and I can breathe the air twice, that means that you only have to calculate how much liters of air are in that room, and then you divide it and you have the time, how many breaths you can take.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I want to say, what do I want to know from the tree? What was most
Yeah, you can.
most best day of the life?
That's a really cool question. And I don't know how we could answer that with technology, but I will think about that, because that would be really cool to figure out what was the best tree of the day's life.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go with Anna. Sorry, Ivan, you spoken yet already. Anna, hello.
Yeah, good evening. I wanted to ask if we can know, for example, how many kind of kids the tree has, and if we can get the genome of the tree, and then to get the genome of the small tree of its kid, and try to kind of see the similarities and try to get to know how the tree starts curling, depending on its genetic code and depending on the parent of this tree. If we can figure out something like this, and what it will give us.
Yeah, yes, we can. Reproduction is a bit tricky for trees because it's not always two parents make one child with trees. Like, for example, I showed you this tree, this one, which it's a clone. So all of these trees are genetically identical. They look like different trees, but they are the same tree in that they have the same genetic material. Now, some of these trees can reproduce by vegetative reproduction, it's called. What they do is basically they grow new parts from the roots. And then it looks like a new tree. And if you have two of these that grow up and you would cut the roots in the middle, you would have two individual organisms that would live without, like, they would survive, but they are exactly the same genetically. So trees can reproduce in that way without even the need for sex and the need for having parents. When they do have parents, we can still trace them. And we can trace them to see, you know, how much material came from which parent. And we can analyze that. And there are a few trees for which we now have the entire genome analyzed. This is a quaking aspen, and aspen is actually one of the trees that we do have the genome analyzed for. For other trees like the sequoias I was showing you, the redwoods, the really tall trees we climbed in the beginning, we don't have that information yet. But it's something that scientists started to look at, and they start to look at how we can also use genetics to, for example, make trees resistant against certain pests and pathogens and sicknesses. Because sometimes we lose a lot of trees because, for example, here in my street where I live, we had a lot of ash trees, and there's a little insect that came from Asia, which didn't exist here in North America. And it has been killing all of these trees. And we now try to find a variety of that tree, of that ash tree, that's genetically resistant to this insect and that won't die from it. But it's something that, you know, it's quite difficult. So it's slow progress, but hopefully we will get there. Otherwise, we might lose all of the ash trees.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you for your question.
And Ruslana, yeah, you were waiting too long.
Hello, I'm Ruslana, and you was talking about some juice from the clone, and I, when I was on Western Ukraine, I drink the juice, and I want to show you my plants.
Go ahead.
Please do.
No.
Oh, nice. A cactus. That's a very cool cactus.
It's 3 of them.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you grow it by yourself?
Yes.
That's very cool. Thank you, Ruslana.
If I stop sharing my screen,
yeah,
I can show you. Wait a second. You can now see me.
Yeah.
And then you realize that I share my room with loads of plants.
Looks really pretty.
I also have a cactus.
Cool. That's cool. Okay, and we have sometimes for some question. Okay, Svetlana, are you ready to ask your question?
Yes. I wanted to say that I have at my home a lot of plants that are from like present or in. I have some plants that we growed alone, and every year we grow with my mother lots of plants. I have lots of plants and seeds that I want to grow. I even have the seed from avocado that we're going to grow with my mother. And my question is, I wanted to ask, how many languages can you speak?
How many languages can I speak? That's a good question. I speak English, German, French, because where I live here in Canada, we speak French. So I speak those 3 languages, and then there are a couple of other languages that I understand, but I'm not very good at. I'm not as fluent as in those 3. Those 3 are my main gig. They are easier. There's also a funny language called Plattdeutsch, which is only spoken by a very few people where I grew up in Germany. So I speak that language as well, but nobody knows that language. So it's not very useful for international travel, but back home it's useful.
But it counts anyways.
Yes, and I want to say that I can speak Ukrainian, English. I'm learning now Germany, and I can speak Polish and a little bit Russian.
That's really good. That's very impressive. And you know what you said about the growing plants. I'm trying to grow an avocado plant. I haven't succeeded yet. The problem is also in Canada, you can grow things inside, but when you want to grow things outside, especially tropical plants like avocados, it's really difficult. Normally they die in winter.
Okay, thanks, Svetlana. And okay, let's do one more question, or maybe you have 5 minutes and we can take some questions. How long can you stay?
I have 5 more minutes, so 1 or 2 questions, and then I actually have to head off.
Yeah, I understand. It's cool. Okay, Ivanchik, hello.
I want to ask you, do you know the type of tree which live the longest?
That's, as I told you earlier, trees don't die of old age. So normally the trees that live the longest are the trees that live in habitats where they grow slowly. So it's not necessarily the type of trees, but some trees that grow really old are Douglas firs, because they tend to live in the mountains where they grow really slowly. And because they grow really slowly, they get really old. So Douglas firs can get really old, but there are all sorts of other types of trees. So the species doesn't affect age that much. It's more the growth. And some species are faster growing. So you have some species that grow really fast, like aspen, for example. We were looking at these aspen trees. They grow so fast that they tend to die pretty young. So slower growing species tend to be older. Trying to think of some other good examples for, well, I say that, but at the same time, the big redwood trees that are, 100 meters tall, they can get really old. They just get so much bigger than other trees because they are so stable that they can survive, even being very big. We found some redwood trees that were more than 1,000 years old, so they already existed when, knights were still roaming around Europe, and it was medieval times. It's very weird when you think about that, when you climb the tree and you think about the fact that the tree probably has seen some medieval knights.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And let's get last question. Maria, can you turn on your video camera so I can unmute you and you can ask your question? Hello.
Yeah, hello. I just have 2 things to say, like one question and one thing. Last year, I tried with I don't remember.
Oh, Maria, sorry, you have bad internet connection. Let's stop the video.
It was very sweet, and I liked it. Okay. My question is, how do you know how a tree feels you anticipate with the help of programs or have, for example, sensors of the tree?
That's a really good question. And feeling is so first of all, some of what you said got cut up with the internet connection, but I understood your question. So I'm going to answer that, and then we can, you can come back to the other stuff if you want to. So feeling, as I said earlier, trees don't have a brain and they don't have consciousness. So they don't feel the same way that we feel. They are able to experience, like they experience dry times, wet times, they experience obstacles when they try to grow. And some of these things we can measure, and we do measure, and then we can say something about that. Some other things we cannot measure. And then, we decided that we're going to try in our messages to stick to what we can measure, so that we can objectively say this is what the tree experienced. Because otherwise there's a big component of interpretation and of me telling that the tree feels this, even though I don't have objective data for it. So we really prefer to just tell about the things that we can measure. And and there are more and more things, like we get much better with sensors. So we get much better at measuring these things and understanding these trees, but there's still so much to discover. And I saw one question in the chat that I just wanted to answer quickly because it was on the same topic, which is whether trees feel pain. And pain is a sensation that, again, works with our central nervous system, with our brain and our nerves. Trees don't have nerves, so they do not feel pain the same way that we do. They can still be injured, but they don't feel the same pain. But it still is very important for the tree to have some chemical signaling to detect an injury and try to do something about it. For example, when I poke a hole into the tree to extract maple syrup, that's an injury. And in a very bad case, it could kill the tree because, let's say, a mushroom grows in there and starts destroying the tree. It's very unlikely. And normally what the tree does is it experiences that there was a hole drilled into it and it tries to close that hole. So sometimes you see trees grow around things that were put into the tree. And quite often the tree succeeds at closing that. So they are able to detect the injury and to close it, but they don't feel pain like we do.
This is a great answer and a great question. The last question about pain. Okay, guys, so sorry we can take all the hands because teacher need to go, but I think we can, maybe someday we can continue the lesson with you and we will have all these questions, okay? So this is, sorry.
I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for the wonderful questions. And thank you for being interested in all of this.
And it was our pleasure to have you here with us. And thank you for watching our YouTube translation. And now you can say all your goodbyes. I will unmute you all and hope to see you next time, team.
Goodbye.
Have a nice day. Bye. Thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye. Have a nice day.
Bye. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Nice day.
I'm really thank you for the lesson. Bye.
Goodbye.